who we do have on the panel are three very, very good speakers. Deborah Cohen is investigations editor at the BMJ. She's collaborated on investigations with the BBC, Channel 4 News, Dispatches, and Al Jazeera. And she's in the process of starting up a new venture. It's so new it doesn't have a name yet, but it's a health investigation unit at Oxford University based at the Centre of Evidence-Based Medicine. So that's pretty exciting stuff, I think. Dr. Chris Chambers is a Senior Research Fellow in Cognitive Neuroscience at Cardiff University. He's also one quarter of Headquarters, which is the fabulous psychology blog on The Guardian, which I urge you all to go and look at immediately afterwards, and is up for an ABSW award this evening. And if by some statistical freak you haven't managed to see Ivan today, I don't quite understand how that's possible, because he's been on pretty much every panel and sometimes on two panels at the same time. He's Vice President of MedPage Today, also teaches at NYU, Vice President of the Association of Healthcare Journalists, obviously Mr. Retraction Watch and Embargo Watch, written for Reuters Health and Scientific American and various others. And he told me before this, now that he's very relaxed now and is going to really let rip on this. I think that was it. Really let rip on this panel. So yes, look out for that. So the topic at hand is reproducibility in science, or irreproducibility in science, and how we deal with that, and how we deal with that as journalists in an intelligent way. There may be people in the audience who were around, reporting, perhaps as cub reporters, or maybe even as quite senior reporters at the time in 1989, when Stanley Pons and Martin Fleischmann claimed to have created cold fusion at the University of Utah, which turned out not to be the case. But the problem of reproducibility, or not being able to reproduce things, is not new. But there are now different ways of sort of seeing the problem, I suppose, because of so much research being online, and also there's a new kind of willingness to confront the problem and try to understand it and avoid it. And I think that brings into the open a lot of issues for journalists that it's going to be good to tackle today. So first of all, I'd like to start off with Chris.
Right, thanks, James. Can you all hear me? Is this on? Yeah. Okay, so I think it's great that reproducibility is a topic at a journalism conference, because it's such a vital, central part of the way we do science, the way we think about science, the way we report science, and ultimately in the long term, it's the only marker we have for what we believe is true or not in the science that we're all doing or reporting. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I see as the causes for the reproducibility crisis that we're in at the moment, particularly in the life sciences, and some of the potential solutions. I'm a psychologist and neuroscientist by trade, but I care deeply about reproducibility because in my field particularly, there's been a lot of questions raised lately about particularly famous findings and important bodies of work not being repeatable. So when we think about reproducibility, we're confronted with, I think, a very bad fact about the way science operates at the moment. We have an incentive problem that cuts across life, medical and social sciences, where what's good and what's best for science on the one hand, which is high quality research regardless of the particular outcome of that research, competes with what's best for scientists in terms of their careers. And if you're a scientist and you want to have a successful academic career, what you want to do is produce a lot of good results. What are good results? Well, these are some terms pulled from a very typical peer review of a paper that's been highly regarded by the reviewers: novel, striking, clear, major advance, significant, cure, breakthrough, high impact, and so on. Words that define results that we believe are good and interesting and important. And of course, our little favourite here for every Nature paper you've ever seen will say, for the first time we show. Novelty is key. But there's a problem, because the minute we start judging the quality of science from the results, we end up compromising certain aspects of the scientific method. Here is the scientific method that we all know and love, starting with hypothesis testing, study design, data collection, analysis, data interpretation, and then either publication or continuing with another study, and so on around it goes. One of the reasons we have a reproducibility crisis is because this system is being gamed. First of all, in psychology, and I'm going to throw some statistics at you from within my field, there's an almost complete absence of direct replication or close replication of previous work. Just 1 in 1,000 papers reports a replication of a previous study by a different researcher to that original work. We have very small samples. I think you heard about statistical power earlier today in one of the panels. Samples that are too small to enable sensitive detection of true effects when they're there. There are all kinds of insidious cherry picking that can go on in analysis and in hypothesis testing, and these have a very high prevalence in psychology and neuroscience. And we even have various other ways which the system is compromised by researchers changing the hypothesis after they get their results in order to fit with something unexpected or with a narrative that's easier to sell. On top of this, by the time it comes to publishing, very few researchers will actually share their data openly, and journals impose a crippling publication bias in which only the most positive or interesting or definitive results will be published. So if we look at the way these sit on top of the scientific method, who is surprised that we have such a problem with reproducibility in science? So can we fix this? I think we can. And I'm going to suggest 4 ways of doing this. The first is stop judging the value of science according to the results. It's not a good measure. It might be what we find interesting, but the minute we do that, the minute quality equals interesting, then we're condemning what we're doing to becoming soft. How can we do this? Well, we think, and I'm part of a wider kind of consortium of researchers who are trying to reform the way publishing works. And we think that the answer here is to actually assess what we want to publish in science before results even exist. So here on the left is the conventional peer review process that we all hate, beginning, of course, with the submission of a manuscript that contains all the different stages of the paper from inception to completion. This is then, of course, reviewed, revised, rejected, and, if you're lucky, published. We can change the way this works by breaking the review process up into 2 stages. And I'm going to just talk briefly about the Registered Reports Initiative, which brings pre-registration into the act of publishing in order to make the peer review process blind to results. So at the first stage, the manuscript is reviewed before researchers do their data collection, so just the introduction and the proposed methodology. This goes out for pre-data peer review, and then after some degree of analysis and consideration can be awarded in-principle acceptance, where the journal virtually guarantees to publish the final outcome of the research regardless of the particular result. The authors then go and do their research, and then when they're finished, they resubmit a full manuscript that includes the stages from the first paper, plus, of course, the results and discussion, with the results divided into two subsections, one which focuses on pre-registered outcomes, so the outcomes of the hypotheses and the analyses that were entered at the first stage, and a second kind of part of the results which can be completely exploratory and can, report some kind of serendipity or anything like that. This then goes to post-data peer review for a quick quality check, and then it's published. So we think this helps because it means that this critical stage here is made a little bit like a drug trial where the researchers are initially blinded to the thing that they're trying to measure, which is, of course, whether it's placebo. And in the peer-reviewed publishing model, the results can be thought of as the intervention. So last summer, we called for this kind of publishing model to be embraced widely across the life sciences because we think it's something that is worth adding as a new option for researchers. And the good news is that it's taking off quite well. So we've got 8, maybe 9 journals now that have already offered this format, and it's something as science journalists that I'd advise you to keep your eyes on as you assess papers and you assess stories as they arise. And there's many more journals in the pipeline that are going to launch this format later this year and next year. So you're going to see a lot of change here. For anyone who's interested, we have written a detailed question and answer paper that looks deeply at this, at why this is such a good idea and addressing some of the most common questions and concerns. But this isn't the only answer to reproducibility. It's one part of the puzzle, and I'm going to just whip through a few more that I think are important. We need to place more value in replication. Replication is the lifeblood of any science that wants to try and generate theory based upon robust evidence. And I think that all journals should dedicate space to replications. There's even been suggestions that journals should operate a pottery barn rule, where if they publish something that's novel and exciting, then they buy themselves in to also publishing the replication attempts that come their way, which I think is a neat idea. And I think RC UK should reserve funding for replications. We should make open data the rule rather than the exception that it is now. Public data sharing has huge benefits for everybody in terms of, not just in terms of scrutinizing and checking that authors are behaving true to the results, but also in terms of big data and answering questions in the future that can't be addressed with small data sets. I think it should be mandatory barring certain ethical constraints. And finally, we need, and this is particularly relevant for this audience, of course, but we need more investigative science journalism. And it's something that I think is sadly lacking really in the media at the moment, is a real concentration of critical reporting, because that helps keep the system honest. I don't think any system is really capable of self-regulation, particularly academia, one where it's so easy to game the system consciously and unconsciously to succeed. So science journalism, I think, holds a real key to enforcing and encouraging that kind of transparency that we need. So I'll leave it at that and move on. Thank you.
Sorry, I wanted to sit down there so I could actually see Chris's slides and maybe even argue with him a little bit. It is late in the day. Okay. So, whoops. Okay. So I sort of wanted to talk today and give you a little bit of a challenge and ask the question sort of, so you want to get it wrong. And to sort of challenge us all to think about how often we want to be wrong, whether we're comfortable being wrong that often, and quite frankly, even more important, because that's a little bit glib, but what do we do when we find out we're wrong? Because, and I'll sort of start with a clip from that I'm sure you're all familiar with, if this will work, which...
Everybody is to leave here immediately. This cafe is closed until further notice. Clear the room at once. How can they close me up? I'm shocked to find that gambling is going on in here. Greetings. Oh, thank you very much. Everybody out at once.
That was actually unintentionally funny. I apologize. I shouldn't have sort of had to pause to laugh at something I've seen a million times, as I'm sure you all have. So barring the statin drugs, which maybe Deb will tell us more about, because I know she's been so anxious to talk about that all day. What I was really getting at with this clip, you probably even missed the quote, but you all know it anyway, is, you know, and we heard earlier that, you know, this sort of reproducibility problem has been around for a long time. This issue of getting things wrong has been around for a long time. 1989, I think we could go back further than that even, but certainly that's one that's very much in the public consciousness, so it's worth raising. But as journalists, I sometimes am sort of forced to think about this scene from Casablanca, this very famous scene, and sort of I'm shocked, and I'm sort of obviously, you know, going to transform this for our purposes. I'm shocked that there's fraud in science, that there's a lack of reproducibility in science. And it would almost be as if someone, instead of coming with your winnings from the craps table, someone came and said, your story from last year, sir. And I think that the reason why we kind of are sort of shocked is that it's human nature to not want to be wrong. It's human nature to sort of not like to be reminded that we're wrong. And yet we're a pretty critical part of the problem as science journalists, and I very much put myself in this camp and blame myself as well. But by sort of chasing all these studies, by putting, I think, too much emphasis on individual studies, we're really sort of fostering this. And let me sort of go into what I mean a little bit. So here's a story from a paper that some of you may have heard of. It's on the other side of the pond, so maybe not. But this is the New York Times, a story from March 12, 1981. Study links coffee use to pancreas cancer. And I'm sorry to any of you drinking coffee at the moment, but you really should put it down because this was in the New York Times, and we know that everything in the New York Times is true and remains true forever. The Capitals, by the way, wasn't. It's not that they became a tabloid that day. It's just the way that they archived their old stuff that wasn't online in 1981. And here's a quote from this vaunted institution. So not only did you have the New York Times saying it, but Harvard, this fine institution, said, this leader of a research group. I just love this quote though. So first he says he stopped drinking coffee when he found this this result. But then he said, of course, a doctor from Harvard speaking in the New York Times says, I would not presume to advise others, says the doctor in the New York Times from Harvard. Okay. But wait a second. And by the way, I don't know if you can see it, but this is, I think, one of the best bylines in journalism. Harold Schmeck Jr., he either had to go into this or he would have in the States had to go into peanut butter because that's the Smucker's must be good or whatever that's called. So here's a story that came out a few months later, and the critics say study was flawed. Well, again, by the way, this was in New England Journal of Medicine. I may have left that part out, although it was probably clear in one of the slides. And so here's someone from the VA hospital in White River Junction, not Harvard, actually about 2 hours away from Harvard. And what this quote says, and I'll just sort of translate it a little bit, their control group was actually people hospitalized for non-cancers of the GI tract. So what's one of the very first things, I assume this is similar here in the UK, that a doctor might tell you if you had a GI problem to stop doing? Maybe drinking coffee, right? So there was a major confounder, and Deb and I talked about this morning in our session on statistics. There's a major confounder that basically invalidated this study, even though it had been in New England Journal of Medicine, it therefore made it into the Times. And he goes on, and he's basically saying, so the fact that you had all these people who weren't drinking coffee, who didn't have cancer, well, no, they actually had stopped drinking their coffee because they had other GI problems. It's a significant flaw that, quite frankly, the peer reviewers should have picked up, and yet they didn't. So that's 1981. You'll all recall this, of course, a little bit more recent history. In 1998, we were told, again by the New York Times, this was a front page story, back when such things meant anything, was above the fold on a Sunday in the New York Times. And it said that, according to this story, here's the quote, within a year that, basically the fact that in mice is at the end of that's the lead sentence of the story, you basically have, it's sort of that line from Jerry Maguire, you had me at hello. Well, you're not going to get to the part about in mice if you have cancer, if you know anyone with cancer, if you ever think about cancer, because you hear that this will eradicate any type of cancer with no obvious side effects and no drug resistance. That's quite powerful. And then, of course, we have the famous quote from Jim Watson. I did see a picture of him and that other guy, Crick, that was his name, right? Who said that that Judah Folkman was going to cure. He was going to be remembered. He was going to cure cancer in 2 years, and this is sort of this is just hyperbole to the hyperbolic. And then, by the way, I just want you to note the byline on that story. You'll all remember this was, of course, Gina Colada, although I guess it's been long enough now that not everyone actually remembers this story, or some of us, I don't know if anyone was born after that, but it feels to me as I get older that some of you might have been. But Gina Colada wrote that story in 1998, and all this. And what happened? In February of last year, apparently, and this was a study that appeared in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences and PNAS, saying that actually maybe not. And look at that byline. That's the same Gina Colada who apparently something happened between 1998 and 2013. And by the way, that highlighting is the Times does that because it's sort of an automated thing. But wait a second. Actually, mice, which were the model, of course, for this wonderful miracle drug in 1998, maybe they're not such a good model for cancer. And yet we run around and we sort of, like Casablanca, we sort of say, I'm shocked that any of this is happening. I'm shocked that we ever got anything wrong. And yet, lo and behold, and Gina's actually a terrific reporter. It's just that I think she gets sort of, and many of us do, get sort of hooked by all these great stories. So this is a quick little quiz. I know it's late in the day, so I'll do it quickly, but try and keep you awake. 5,000 compounds start out for the market. I'll be like an auctioneer. How many of them actually make it into clinical trials? I see 3. I see 5. I see 1. Does anyone want to go like significantly above 5? Can we just, anyone raise their hands? It's a leading question. Please don't. Okay. The answer is 5. You in the back. Sold, a wonder drug. How many of those actually make the FDA approval? The number can only be less than 5, just in case it was unclear. I know it's late. 1. Okay, the answer is 1. Many of you probably know these data. And I will give you the source of the data, which may make you question it, and that's fair enough. But my point in looking at this, pharma actually has reason to make this number look bigger and smaller, so I happen to think that the sort of pressures align and sort of go to the right place, but then again, we could argue about that. But it's not terribly far off, okay? And so the point is, when we keep writing about studies, by the way, if it hasn't made it into clinical trials, that means not humans. That means all of this stuff we see about mice and everything going to cure everything that, because some mouse, it lit up in an fMRI in the right place and therefore we've cured cancer, cured brain tumors. All of that is in that 99.9 or 99.99 chance of not working, of not being right, and yet we continue writing about it. And so it's not reproducible. These are the data that demonstrate that in clinical medicine. You've heard from Chris about about psychology and other areas, and yet we keep doing that. Okay, so here's my little, thing about retractions, which I run, co-founded a blog on called Retraction Watch. This is you can't quite probably make out the numbers, but this is by a guy named Neil Saunders in New Zealand, and that's actually the URL. He updates this. Actually, it's constantly updated. It's an algorithm. From 1977 to 2014, all the retractions in PubMed, all the retraction notices. And what you see here is a pretty dramatic rise. That to the right, that's retraction notices per 100,000. So we knew that retraction numbers were on the rise, but what Richard, who's sitting here, Richard Van Noorden at Nature showed from 2001, the decade 2001-2010, that number went up tenfold, while the number of papers only went up 44%. So something's happening, and it continued, and obviously 2014 is only half over, so it looks like we'll continue the trend of increasing. So something is happening. There's more stuff that, again, maybe not be reproducible, maybe he's being caught for plagiarism, duplication, things like that, but something's happening. I think by now you're all probably familiar with the work of John Unitas, who's now at Stanford, but always worth reminding everyone to, I would urge you to actually set up a Google alert for his work. I mean, it's strong enough, powerful enough. This is a very, obviously, quite a loaded headline, a title. When researchers sort of criticize us for our terrible headlines and overstating the case, I point them to this, except that he's actually got a point and the data support him. This is, if I'm not mistaken, the most ever cited paper at PLOS Medicine, and just the views are sort of through the roof. His point is that so much, he's not saying fraud, by the way, and that's why Adam and I are always very careful. We're obviously fixated on fraud, retractions, and things like that. That may be the best way to get people to think about this issue who wouldn't normally, and that's kind of one of the reasons that we do things the way we do them. But the much bigger problem, it's not tip of iceberg, it's sort of, the 4 molecules of water, ice on top of the iceberg, and then the rest of the iceberg. It's a much different magnitude. The real problem here is reproducibility. Again, you heard from Chris about psychology, but this is really a bigger issue in many areas. And that's where I want to end and just sort of, again, challenge us. How often do you want to be wrong? And again, to go to another movie, which, Clint Eastwood, who used to be a really great actor and director till he decided to start interviewing chairs at political conventions. His line, do you feel lucky? And I guess I don't like playing those odds. Maybe other people do, and all the best to you. But I would urge us all to think about the lack of reproducibility, be much more cautious. If it means practicing sort of a slower journalism, which we can talk about in the questions, maybe that's the way to go. But just think about this, and in your daily work, I think it'll help you to be wrong less often. So.
Thanks very much, Adam.
It's a good point. I haven't got any slides, but I wouldn't mind that slide staying up there, because I think it's a reminder of why I do my job, to be perfectly honest. And it's well worth a read, that John Ioannidis paper. well, any slide will do actually, just a bit of a colourful backdrop.
Oh, sorry.
So I'm investigations editor at the BMJ, maybe quite an odd thing for a medical journal to have, but as I kind of say repeatedly, health sciences are the gift that keep on giving in terms of journalism. There's a lot to investigate, and this kind of study keeps me in work in many ways. So the whole point of what I do is I'm analysing, scrutinising, kind of tempting at times to speak truth to power. I'm an investigative journalist. So I spent the whole time unpicking what's potentially gone wrong. And I'll talk a little bit about the stories that we've done, because that helps kind of shed a light on how you as journalists might unpick lack of replication of studies and why that might go on. Because it's always worth bearing in mind if you see two different studies, and I'm going to focus mainly on medical sciences because that's the area that I know the best. Why might two different groups of researchers come to two different conclusions? Because you have to remember, when a study pops up in your inbox as a press release, you have to don't forget there's PubMed there. Go and have a look at PubMed and see what has already been published before, what has been editorialised, what has been published, and compare what has popped up in your inbox to what is already in the literature. Because even though researchers are supposed to go and reference studies that have gone before it, so often they don't. I mean, I haven't got all day to kind of list the number of times that has happened, but I see it all the time where there has been a body of literature that people have just failed to pick up on. And there's lack of excuse now. Increasingly, journals are putting online all their studies and research back to the kind of last century, the 19th century. You know, the publication I work for has. And this became really apparent to me when I did a story on metal hip implants, which is a device used in medicine. It's an orthopaedic device for people that want hip replacement. And there were concerns raised in the medical literature in the 1970s, and they'd actually dropped the idea of using metal hip implants in the 1970s because of tumour formation, because metal hip implants are made of cobalt and chromium. And in the 60s, there were a lot of studies done that if you have high levels of cobalt in your blood, you can get, and this was in certain factories. So factory studies are often quite good that happen, with dye manufacturers and things like that, because they notice certain physiological and pathophysiological phenomenon. They'd actually noticed cardiomyopathy, so problems with your heart in the 60s if you have too high levels of cobalt. But it came back into fashion in the 1990s when people wanted a more durable option for hip implants. But it didn't take a genius to look back in the medical literature and find out why these issues might have been dropped. But why didn't they go and reproduce those studies that were done in the 1970s? And perhaps we wouldn't have had the problems that we've seen now, where people are having to have revision hip operations because the device is failing and it's destroying tissue around the device, around the area. And also we don't know long term what the high levels of metal ions in patients' blood are going to do. But why didn't they reproduce those early studies when they were putting those hip implants on the market? I spent ages trawling through the FDA database, because in Europe you can't get any information on medical devices because it's commercial in confidence and it trumps the freedom of information legislation at the European level. They're trying to change that. So I spent ages going through the FDA database, and for all those that know anything about medical implants, there's two ways to get on the market in America. There's something called 510K, which is, and I feel kind of slightly embarrassed talking about this in front of an American doctor, but anyway, there's 510K, which you don't have to do a clinical study to get an implant onto the market. Or there's another route called pre-medical authorization, where you have to do a clinical study to get a device on the market. And we found that all these implants had gone through 510K. So they'd said it was like something else on the market. So one of the things as a journalist I would encourage you to do is look back at the medical literature. If you are doing a clinical study, look back and see what's been published. If there isn't any replication of what's happened in the past, ask yourself why. The other thing I would say to look at, and one thing you see with healthcare a lot is doctors and stuff, we're not very good at saying, we don't know. We're not very good at acknowledging uncertainty. And that's where other major problems can come in. Simply saying we don't know, studies are conflicting, we're not very good at dealing with that, even though you're supposed to have a certain kind of study called a systematic review or a meta-analysis that pulls together all different study types, asks a question to reach a conclusion. But one of the issues, and I won't go into the kind of problems with that, is that any early problems then may be heightened in those kinds of studies. So one of the things as a journalist I would encourage you to do is actually go back to the researchers. Think about why are they asking this question now. If you think about it, if you're thinking politically, if you're a political journalist, you kind of want to know, why is this bugger telling me this thing now? What's in it for them? Kind of slightly, and this might be overly cynical, but I have no problem with that, ask why is this question being asked? What is it? What's prompted? What's led to that question? What's underpinning it? Speak to the scientists, contact them. If it's not clear in the introduction why a question's being asked, go back and speak to them. Or why isn't a question being asked? And that is something that I think is often the problem. If you don't want to know the answer to something, you don't ask the question. And I see that a lot in my job. Well, we've got a scientist. I mean, one of the issues, and I need to be careful because I know there's a camera here and I'm worried about defamation. But one of the questions that's ongoing in diabetes at the moment is why aren't certain, in a particular class of drugs, why aren't certain questions being asked? There's a dilemma to do with the pancreas and a certain class of drugs. Why aren't fairly simple questions being asked and fairly simple studies being done? They might be being done, we don't know about it, or they're not being asked because there's a risk that there is something there that we don't want to know. And that sounds incredibly conspiratorial, and I realise I might be overly cynical, but given the nature of the stuff that passes through my desk on a daily basis, it does give you reason to be critical. The other thing is that you might want to look at is I'm sure you're aware, and I do a lot of kind of drug stuff, and I don't want to pick on drug companies whatsoever here. It just so happens that's what falls into my in tray. But as you're aware, there's certain ways that you get something onto the market, and you start off in a lab, and then you go on to animal studies. Animal studies are a whole world of pain in terms of reproducibility. Obviously, there's the applicability to humans further down the line, but even in terms of replication there. And there's been a few recent studies. I know the BMJ's published one, but also PLOS Medicine had a recent paper on the problems with animal studies. And the authors of one study contacted me and said, we're worried about animal rights activists because, we're saying that animal studies are basically not very good. Well, it's up to scientists to get their house in order, to be quite honest. But if you think about the animal studies, you're looking for effects on an animal. Now, that might be, animals jumping off kind of, the end of the table if you're looking for neuropsychiatric effects. But also you're looking at pathology. Now, if you're dissecting something, and this is directly relevant to a story I did about the same class of diabetes drugs that I did last year. So if you want to know more about it, it's there. I'm just slightly concerned about defamation. Is that you can dissect organs any which way you want to dissect them. So you can either see a problem or you can not see a problem. Depends on how you look, depends on how you dissect. So in this particular instance, the Food and Drugs Administration had asked certain companies to go and do further safety studies once the drug was on the market on animals. Would you think once something's on the market, they're going to, and there's concerns about safety. Where's the incentive to find issues with safety? So, but there's certain ways of dissecting, and so what happened, pancreases were taken out. We have no oversight. There's no data. You can't get hold of the data. I mean, it kind of speaks to the all trials mantra. But you need independent oversight. So if you can dissect a pancreas in all different ways, there might be stuff in the head of the pancreas which is tucked into the kind of duodenum, which is quite hard to get at. So there are certain ways that, and it was independent scientists that brought these problems to the fore because they'd seen it in their animal studies, but it wasn't replicated in company studies. So again, you have to keep on asking the questions. I'm not saying one group are right, one group are wrong. One group would release all their data into the public domain, the other group wouldn't. Any guesses which way round that was? No, it doesn't take a prize for guessing. So again, if you've got concerns about, and I'm not going to talk about statins because I can't really, But there are genuine questions. If in doubt, ask for the data. The Tamiflu story that I worked on from the outset, in 2009, Cochrane collaboration came to the BMJ and they've been asked to update their Cochrane review. Does everyone know Cochrane? Cochrane do meta-analyses, systematic reviews. They've been asked by the NIHR, so public money, the National Institute of Health Research, to update a Cochrane review of oseltamivir, Tamiflu, for the pandemic, because there was an ongoing pandemic. And they realised there was a question posed by a Japanese paediatrician saying, hang on, you've relied on a review article, not a systematic review, so you're systematically going through the literature, a review article that claims Tamiflu reduces hospitalisations and complications of influenza, which is what mainly causes the problems, so kind of pneumonia, things like that, in influenza. Can you get at that data? And they'd included it into their first meta-analysis in 2006, but hadn't bothered to go back and double-check that data. They'd just extracted it from a review article. Now, that review article never claimed to be systematic. So then what happened was a chase to find the data. So they asked the lead authors of said review if they could have the data. They couldn't provide the data, so we went round asking the lead author of the two published trials that were in this review article if they had the data. They couldn't provide the data. So and in the end, I mean, massive story, obviously. In the end, they finally reported where they got all the clinical study reports, which are the reports that the regulators get and companies hold for regulatory purposes, that contains all the protocol, consent forms, adverse events, all that kind of thing, that they were able to update the review to see whether major decisions, policy decisions had been made on a certain review that claimed hospitalisations, secondary complications were reduced by the use of Tamiflu. It took years to verify and try and replicate those findings, and sure enough, they didn't replicate those findings. So it's in every single piece of work, I guess, as an investigative journalist in this area, you're asking certain questions all the time. Why is this study being done? What's the idea behind it? Can I get the data? Will they publish the data? Certain questions. And again, the other things you need to look at. So you've got two studies, or... Sorry. Yeah. So just keep critical, I think the thing is, and constantly ask questions. So I'm sure we can pick up on some other things. But I know I'm just talking. There's loads there.
Okay. Yes, please. Right. I guess we've probably got a couple of roving mics knocking around, do we? Yes. Yeah, let's go for Alok there first.
Hi there, Alok Jha. I'm currently unemployed. Chris, you said that self-regulation doesn't work for science, which is interesting because it's meant to be a self-regulated profession by its statutes and by anyone who's a scientist telling you that peer review is the way forward and mistakes will out eventually and so on. Do you think, just from a devil's advocate position, that scientists maybe need an external regulator of some sort that goes in and investigates things? That's my first question. And secondly, I'd like just a bit of an update on your pre-registration idea. I know that when you proposed it, there was some backlash. I'm just curious about what arguments people may have made and how that all went.
Okay, yeah, good questions. To answer the first question, if scientists are doing the regulating of scientists, that's inherently self-regulation in my book. One of the great, I think, initiatives that we're seeing at the moment is post-publication peer review, which is changing the whole architecture of science, I think. And what it does, which I think is inherently good, is that it brings the assessment of science outside the ivory tower. And in fact, anyone now on PubMed Commons can add comments to published work. No, that's not true?
Sorry, I'm just fact-checking you. That's what I do. So only people who have actually published papers that are indexed on PubMed can do it.
Well, even if that's
but
the
other
case,
people can,
there are other ways that this can feed in. And so I think the public and journalists do play a role in exercising that kind of external regulation. The second question that you asked was about the response to pre-registration, in particular the journal-based model I talked about. It's been very positive overall, I have to say. There's always going to be objections to this because when people see the argument for pre-registration, they immediately see bureaucracy, they see delays, they see stifling of creativity and exploration. And that would be, I guess, the most common criticism of what we're proposing. But in fact, when you sit down and talk to people who raise those concerns in detail and you take them through all of the various safeguards that prevent the system becoming too bureaucratic, that allow exploration, that welcome serendipity, and in fact, the only difference that you're left with between the pre-registered journal-based model that we propose and the conventional system is transparency, knowing what's a hypothesis test and what's not, knowing what's exploration and what's not, sharing data, all of these kind of principles that are supposed to be there as part of open science. So I'd say, by and large, it's been a very positive response.
Okay, I'm gonna go for another question. Yeah, this gentleman over here.
Another unemployed journalist, Michael Kinwart. The title of this section is Reproducibility in Science. So far we've heard about medical science. Do any of these lessons wash over into other areas? Can I put a hand up here? Who here is writing about medical science? Who is not writing about medical science? Fairly evenly balanced. My line is that medicine is mostly art rather than science. But is there any of this relevant to people writing in other areas?
It's a good question. You want to take that one?
Yeah, I think actually, and Chris mentioned, obviously, was talking mostly about psychology. I won't ask you what you think of psychology if you think that medicine has no science behind it, and that wasn't a dig at Chris. I think they both have science behind them. Well, if you look at, I focus on a number of things, but at Retraction Watch, most of our entries are not about clinical medicine. They're mostly, I'd say the mode, if not sort of, well, not the mode, the sort of most common are basic sciences and life sciences, because that's a lot of what's published. They tend to be a little bit more rare in physics, for example, but chemistry is sort of making a go for it recently, so those of you who cover chemistry might check us out a little bit. I think it's a fair mix. If anything, in clinical medicine, the issue is about reproducibility rather than retractions, because things are very well regulated. The way that a lot of folks clinical medicine gets around this problem is the results may actually be perfectly reproducible, but just completely useless. So that's a very different problem. But I do think this spans everything. It just so happens that those of us, I guess, on the panel, at least two of us, are more interested in clinical medicine than not.
Could you comment on why that curve is doing that?
Yeah, and actually, since Richard's in the audience, I might actually ask him to do the same. I think that look, there are a number of the 64,000-pound question is whether or not that's because there's actually sort of more stuff that should be retracted happening, or that we're just picking it up better. And I think, as is often the case, there's evidence for both, but I wouldn't want to stake my house on either. I think it's fair to say that the sort of advent of plagiarism detection software has definitely led to part of that rise. So you have, again, actual plagiarism and then duplication, both of which are picked up by plagiarism detection software. But you also just have more eyeballs on things. I think, to Chris's point, and I apologize for correcting him mid-sentence, but I just felt it was important because I've criticized PubMed Commons for that. The point is that there are more eyeballs on everything. You're absolutely right, Chris. And so there are people finding things, whether they're in the data, in the text, in the images, that they weren't necessarily finding before. And then I think to the question of whether there's actually more fraud, Ferik Fang and Arturo Casadevall have made a reasonable argument that I think is sort of evidence-based but not necessarily conclusive, as are many things in science, that there may be more, the increased pressure on scientists may be leading to more fraud. I think that we have to be careful about that because it's just very difficult to prove. But certainly the number of retractions for everything is going up, so it's a sort of roundabout way of saying we're not quite sure, but there are lots of potential reasons.
I mean, what I would add, and I can't comment specifically on other areas of science other than kind of posing the kind of questions, are the pressures that perhaps lead to distortion of medical science at times, are they similar pressures in other parts of science? Competition for funding, publication, the pressure to publish, the use of publications to get funding, the kind of agendas, whether that's confirming your own preconceptions or confirming your own hunches, because that's what you've already always believed for years and years and years, and you set things up to kind of reconfirm your own views. Financial interests, you know, there are certain parts of science that are heavily dependent on people maybe with other agendas that perhaps might lead to distortion of science. So all these issues that we see affects medical science every single day, sitting as an investigative journalist on a medical journal, but just sitting on a medical journal, you have to ask the question, do they affect other areas of science too? I would hazard a guess. In some instances, yes.
Right, do you have any questions that are specifically about how journalists deal with this? Okay, there's a gentleman on the right there. And I'm just, while you're getting the microphone, I'm struck by, I think, something Chris says kind of gets to the nub of the problem. You said that, you know, the problem is that equating quality with interesting, and that's basically what journalists do, is the things that we write about and things we decide are interesting. But
my name's Tom Wilkie. I was science editor of The Independent for the first 10 years of its life. I am still in employment as a journalist, but because of that period, it fell to me to report on the Pons and Fleischmann cold nuclear fusion incident. So it might be relevant, given that you raised it at the very beginning, to say a little bit about that if you
please do,
if you're willing to allow that. The first point of interest about that is that, of course, Pons and Fleischmann, it was not in the life sciences, it was maths and physics and chemistry. The second thing is that there, however, is a point of contact, of similarity, which is that what Pons and Fleischmann were saying was they were making claims of enormous social and economic import. They were claiming that they were able to produce nuclear fusion, hence limitless amounts of energy, by chemical means, effectively in a test tube. So the massive multi-million-dollar, multi-million-pound investments, which are now ITER, in those days it was JET, and also of inertial fusion confinement, were going to be at a stroke redundant. And so this was a major thing. The third point was that the claim first came out actually before any refereed papers had been published. And the fourth thing, which is not of general interest, was that the bloody thing nearly wrecked my marriage. My recollection is that it was an Easter Sunday. We'd had a young child at home. We actually were able to sleep in for once, and the phone rang. It was the news desk of The Independent saying, switch the radio on, and this man with a very heavy Middle European accent was talking about this on the BBC. I said to my wife, it doesn't sound terribly sensible. I'll go in, write a story, and I'll be back after lunch. I don't think she saw me for the next 3 days. The sociology of it was interesting because Pons and Fleischmann were chemists. I'm a physicist. So I went into the office and started phoning every physicist in my contact book. It was in the days before World Wide Web and so on, so your contact book and the phone was terribly important. And the physicists, of course, all said, no, this doesn't sound right. The chemists all said, hey, the chemists have found the secret to energy. Of course it's right. The science editor of the Daily Telegraph was, at that time, a PhD chemist. He had a certain sympathy for the chemist's point of view. Ultimately, the answer was a scientific one. Where are the neutrons? If you have a nuclear reaction going on, the signature of it is that neutrons are produced. And if they had produced the energy that they claimed to, actually, they would have been dead of radiation poisoning. But it took months before all the things came out. And I think credit should go to Nature. There are people from Nature here, because they commissioned somebody to go and look at the Pons and Fleischmann setup, and there was it became absolutely absurd, because when he went, they claimed there was a thunderstorm in Utah that actually fused all the lights so it wouldn't work when he was there. But actually, because he was a physicist, he was able to see that there should have been a residual radioactivity, or I can't remember the details now, at this time distance.
Sorry, do you mind if I speed you up a little bit?
Yeah, that simply wasn't there. So actually, the point actually is a bit confounding to what you're saying. The scientific process actually worked. It wasn't the journalists who refuted Pons and Fleischmann. It was actually the scientific process that did that. And I am actually slightly worried by having spent a lifetime in science journalism about some of the tenor of this. My view has always been that a science journalist is not employed to tell people the truth. A science journalist is employed to report to people what he or she is told is the truth. What is important here is the credibility of the sources upon whom you rely, and if you try to second-guess the science, rather than the scientists who are telling you what the science is, then I think you've stepped beyond journalism. This may be a minority view, I understand that. My view is that the key to my reporting of the Pons and Fleischmann thing was I had credible sources to go to who told me what the science was, not that I was second-guessing the science myself. So I just add that as a slight rider to some of the comments about the need for journalism to ride to the rescue and correct science.
I think that's a really interesting point. I mean, it's pretty fundamental, actually. And both of you have touched on it so far away.
And kind of, I don't think it... Yeah, I mean, what is the truth? I'll start by saying that. I mean, when the odd occasion when the BMJ has used the truth in a headline, we have got into all manner of trouble. What is the truth? There is uncertainty. And again, I can comment more on the area of journalism that I work on. But the stuff that we don't know, and I see... I mean, there's something that I was going to say. There was an interesting study in PLOS Medicine last year, and it was done by the German equivalent of NICE. It's called IQWiG. And they compared what regulators have to do with certain medicines compared to what's in the published literature. Now, which is more truthful? I don't know, but there is a difference. And I think our job as a journalist is to dig and ask questions. I'm not saying that, you know, and you are dependent on your sources, and your sources are important, but you need to ask questions. I'm not saying that you know, we come out with the truth. I don't think that's the case, but I think there are times when you need to ask hard questions of scientists. I'm embroiled in something now with scientists. Obviously, I can't talk about it, but no one is willing to put their head above the parapet and ask questions that they on studies that they have published in their name. And I think as a journalist, you should be asking those questions.
I mean, you know, the point here is that you've got a story of massive importance from credible sources with economic impacts. You know, the news desk is on your back saying, write it. How do how do you sort of navigate that? And, you know.
Well, I'm actually wondering, I mean, when I hear it sort of, if you will, out of context, or I didn't hear out of context, but when I think about just those sentences that it's journalists' job to tell the truth as they're told, if I'm more or less getting that right, I'm very troubled by it. I wonder, though, if we aren't actually sort of saying similar things, but quite differently. If by that, Martin, you mean that you know, we should sort of go to reliable sources who can debunk things effectively, because most things really need to be debunked, I suppose we agree. On the other hand, if you were to sort of take that approach, just the way you put it, to say we're reporting about my country's many failed experiments in war, I think that you would sort of be really sacrificing your great responsibility as a journalist. So I would say that whatever you're doing, however you want to phrase it, as long as you're, as Deb was saying, questioning things and being skeptical about things, if you're, but I would be troubled if the idea was that we should sort of find certain people who say certain things and then sort of don't even question what they say. I guess it's an endless iteration of questioning that I think we always have to be, and that means of our own work as well.
What does that mean in practice, though, for reporting on cold fusion?
Well, it means, you know, and this may be very either unpopular or some people may say unreasonable, but it means doing the very best job you can to get people who aren't connected to it. It sounds like you did, again, if we're looking at this one case, and physicists versus chemists there, And reporting that story rather than sort of doing first, just because you have to do first, I think, one of the things we're learning in this age, and this would have been obviously very different in 1989, but is that, the traffic to stories, the engagement to stories isn't always to the first story about it. It's often, and what I find in my day job at MedPage Today, what others find is it's the smartest take that certainly in the mid and long term actually do much better if we're looking at engagement and traffic as a measure of success and how we sort of get paid. So I would urge people to do that. I mean, we actually do it with something I mentioned this morning called Hype Watch, but I guess it gets down to how often do you want to be wrong. If you're happy to be wrong because things are coming out first and you know that you're probably going to be wrong a good percentage of the time, I mean, that's fine. I'm not comfortable with that. I wouldn't be comfortable with my staff being comfortable with that. It does bring to mind something that, again, my wonderful government has been trying to do to people and that we've been fighting back against, which is creating embargoes. This is, again, my other obsession, but creating embargoes such that you're not allowed to actually share the embargoed material with anyone until the embargo lifts, which plays into this sort of idea that you should, because they know that a lot of people just want to be first. And so if you're going to be first, the only story you can tell is the official one. And when that's a government agency, boy, am I troubled by that. The FDA tried that. A chemical safety board tried that. When I called the chemical safety board on it, they immediately reversed it. The FDA has sort of been less willing to do that. So I think being first is not always such a great thing, and I think we just need to be comfortable with that.
And very quickly to kind of slightly build on that is that, I'm a journalist foremost, I'm asked to comment on bigger issues. Ben Goldacre, I wish in many ways Ben was here because he comments on the access to data issues, the All Trials campaign. I don't get embroiled in that. I simply ask questions, and if people ask me what I found, I will say what I found. Now they interpret, it's up to the reader to interpret what I found. Obviously, I can kind of try and tell the story as simply as possible and what I've found in a simple way. But you let the readers decide in some ways, and I know that's easier for me to do on a specialist publication than it is on a national newspaper. But in many ways, my views don't matter when it comes to the scientific kind of output. There are things I think about, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter.
Should we move on? Okay. Any other questions about what journalists do about this? There's a mark in the green there, please.
So Mark Henderson, Wellcome Trust, previously Times. But I was going to just pick up on, I think, interesting points that Tom was raising and that you were raising where there are points of, I think, agreement here. And a lot of this boils down to know your limitations as a journalist and know what your skills are. And I think Deb is one of the very few journalists in this room who has the statistical skills to actually analyse some of this data properly for herself. And many of us, I certainly don't have those skills. If purporting to analyse data in this way would need professional help in exactly the same way that Tom was describing his experience over Pons and Fleischmann. And I think sometimes where investigative journalism goes wrong in this sphere is when journalists presume to be able to operate beyond their area of skill and expertise. If they draw in the right expertise, I think it's absolutely right to ask the kind of questions that Deb and Ivan are talking about. If not, it can lead to car crashes.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Yeah. Gentleman at the front here. Probably take this as the last one, actually, because we're...
Thanks, Len Fisher, again, I'm afraid. I'm a scientist who's been working across the borders of physics, chemistry, and biology for 50 years, and I've developed my own personal crap watch. And I'm afraid that most of what gets published, you can't criticize necessarily on the basis of truth, but on the basis of triviality. And I would suggest that one of the greatest services that we can do as journalists is to take the trouble to identify what is significant and what is being peddled to you as being significant. So if you're going to go around checking for truth, which someone suggests as a criterion, I would suggest the real criterion that we need is significance and potential significance.
Okay. Does anyone want to pick that up? Or? Probably take that more. That was fairly short, so we can probably take one more question. I think there's a gentleman in the blue there on the edge. Are you still? Oh, is there? Sorry. Actually, we haven't had a question from a woman. Where's? Oh, there you go. Yeah, go for it.
Thanks. It seems to me that for reproducibility, if you're going to have a study done again, that it really needs to reach the same audience as the original did to be able to have the same impact and be able to take down the original. So I think your work is good in getting the pre-data peer review into some journals, but do you think you could get it into big things like Nature, where they sort of rely on sexy stories to sell them?
We're working on it. Yeah, I think that's the ultimate goal. And it kind of, it also ties in with this pottery barn rule, which some have suggested, where if a particular high-impact journal decides to publish a result which they deem to be significant and important and have a lot of potential, they should, by virtue of that, also guarantee to publish replications of said result to a certain extent, regardless of what the outcomes are. That would be really good for the science that we do. It's a little bit naive to think that journals will leap into this, and I'm guilty of this naivety as much as anyone, that journals will leap into this, because they're commercial entities and they have no... Replications might be seen as boring or not novel enough and so on. And that's a clash between the incentive structures of science and publishing. But yeah, I think we need to be bringing the pre-data registered reports model as far through publishing as we can, reaching all of the particular levels of impact that we assign value to.
Great. Okay. Well, I think I will draw it to a close there. Before I thank the panel, I'll just Martin Ince will come up and say a few words, I think, to round things off. But let's give the panel a round of applause. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks. And this morning, at the beginning of this whole thing, I urge any of you who aren't members of the AVSW to join on the grounds it was such a useful and valuable organisation. And I hope what you've seen today has persuaded you that I was right, at least on this occasion. But if you want a little more persuasion, perhaps I could take of what you said, Chris, about investigative journalism. We too have noticed this in the AVSW, for example, in the entries we receive for our annual awards. And we are putting some of our own money, which we don't have a vast amount, but nonetheless some of our financial resources into trying to build investigative journalism in science in this country just a little bit more than it is already. And I hope you'll be hearing a bit more about that sometime soon. So I hope you all had a great day and learned a lot. My original idea at this stage was for maybe 90 minutes, 2 hours, show some PowerPoints about the future of science journalism and give you my prognosis on the whole thing. But I was dissuaded from that. Instead, I'd like to thank all the speakers, chairs and producers of today's sessions for all the hard work they've done and for some really quite outstanding presentations. I was at the session this morning about making science look good online, which made me realise just how pitiful my own offerings are in this field. I'd also like to thank Constance Louis, chair of the programme committee, Sally Robbins, the organiser, and her many helpers and assistants for all their hard work today. The great thing is, normally when somebody stands up at this time of day, they're closing the session. But no, the next stage is you're all very much invited to come downstairs to the exhibition area, where there will be a nice cup of tea and an obesogenic cake. For those of you who signed up for it, the tour of the Royal Society Library. So it's not all quite over yet. So thank you very much for your attention today, and I'll hope to see you all in a couple of minutes.